Hi, I'm Jayesh. I live in New Delhi and currently I work in the Center for Urban Ecology and Sustainability. Today, in this video, I'll be talking about my MA dissertation work titled Vegetation Ecology of Urban Parks and Discourses around an Invasive Tree Species in New Delhi. But before that, I would like to acknowledge some people and my affiliations for providing both professional and personal support throughout this research. I'm really moved by the ability of the plants to move from one place to another place. Every day while commuting in metro, I come across this particular house. Notice the growth of vegetation on the roof. I'm really fascinated by these photographs because they point towards the agency of the plants that they can move on their own. Plants arrived some 300 million years ago, and ever since they have been moving and expanding their distribution throughout the globe. Taking assistance of agents or their specialized seed dispersal strategy, they are able to find new places to grow themselves. However, this movement is not entirely free and restricted by their own biology and also geographical factors such as mountains and deep oceans. With the arrival of human beings in the scene, the pace of movements of plant has accelerated. Although plants have the ability to move on their own, but their impressiveness and utilitarian values asserts agency on human beings. So people have always been moved by plants and they have always been moving plants either intentionally or unintentionally. Much later, in late 15th century, Columbian exchange saw large-scale intercontinental movement of plants. The portmanteau of biota, docked in Columbian ship, crossed hemisphere and brought back home both plants and animals. The New World economy around 1500s was established by the development of plantation systems of sugar and later tobacco and cotton in 17th and 18th century respectively. Both the ecological and physical barriers restricting the movements of plants became diluted as further intensifications of introductions was seen during 19th and 20th century. Botanical gardens and so-called acclimatization societies oversaw movements of these plants from one biogeographic region to other for science, medicine, horticulture, or economic exploitation. Among all, human sentiment is one of the key features shown in the pie charts illustrating the purpose of these introductions in Europe. A large chunk goes for ornamental purposes, but all plants do not stay ornamental eternally. When a plant species moves from its native habitat, then it is placed in either of the categories, exotic or invasive alien species. Invasion biologists have particular reservations against the invasive species, as they have detrimental effects at all the levels. They are responsible for the extinction of native biodiversity and they are a second threat to biodiversity loss. Invasive species have a direct impact on ecosystem functions and services. Moreover, literature suggests positive correlation between climate change and the spread of invasive species. Also, there are economic losses at both global and local scale, affecting both agriculture and protected forests. Invasive species disproportionately affect vulnerable communities in rural areas, especially in developing countries where I come from. So, for the purpose of my study, I take one such uh, invasive tree species called Leucaena leucocephala and try to understand it through an interdisciplinary lens. This miracle tree has a long history of deliberate transportation. Earliest recognition was over 400 years ago by the Spanish who carried Leucaena feed and seeds from its native place Mexico to Philippines. Gradually, local people found its utility as fuel wood. Further, its success in providing overstory for plantation crops such as cocoa, coffee, and vanilla, among others, led to its introduction to plantations of other countries or colonies, rather. Moreover, it has also been used for soil improvement, soil conservation, erosion control in diverse agroforestry systems. In India, Leucaena leucocephala was introduced around 1970s for the purpose of afforestation per se. However, due to its invasive attributes, its reputation has slipped somewhat. An aggressive colonizer of rural sites, a weed of open and disturbed habitats, it establishes dense monospecific thickets and renders such areas inaccessible and threatens native plants. Now it is possibly growing on up to 5 million hectares of land in 105 countries, and World Conservation Union lists this species in hundreds 100 worst invasive organisms. In New Delhi, Leucaena today is a very commonly observed tree. It can be seen at disturbed sites, abandoned land, landfill sites, construction dumps, public parks, and also in the sites which are under proper management, such as zoological parks, botanical gardens, and restored sites. So, while keeping Leucaena at center in this interdisciplinary research, I study tree distributions in 5 urban parks. The aim is to understand the distribution of Leucaena in select urban parks and its habitat associates through classical ecological methods of diversity estimation. In order to gain a better understanding of its social dimension, I studied global and popular discourses around Leucaena through semi structured questionnaire, in depth interviews, and discourse analysis. Based on a selection criteria, I selected 5 parks from the category of community parks of DDA. Any park listed in the government website qualifying the condition was selected for the purpose of data collection. These parks are under the management of different horticulture divisions of the government. Blue squares represents the plots as a consequence of systematic sampling. In totality, 126 vegetation sampling plots of 10 by 10 meter were surveyed and tree abundance recorded. Data analysis show the following results. The green bars indicate Leucaena, which is third and fourth abundant species in 2 parks respectively. In third park, there were no Leucaena trees recorded while sampling. In fourth park, there were no Leucaena trees at all. And in the fifth park, it was most abundant species. Further multivariate analysis show it to be making associations with other species. Horizontal and vertical arrows show associations among tree species. Further cluster dendrogram reveals 4 different clusters at Jacquard index of 40. In the third cluster, notice Leucaena coexisting with both native and invasive and non-native species. On the social dimension of the study, bibliometric analysis indicates that post 1990s the work on invasion biology speeds up. The occurrence of Leucaena leucocephala has shown a consistent increase from 1985 to 2024. Word plot below the graph also indicates that the most associated word with Leucaena is the family name, and next is invasive species. Also, the word invasive species only picks up after 2005. In invasion timeline, a major turning point can be seen around 1993, as Convention on Biological Diversity was signed and sets global legal understanding about invasive species. The graph on the right shows peak in publications in invasion biology around 1991. Post 1993, various institutions, both at global and local scale, started to use the same language against invasive species. Now, in the case of India, to be particular, its link with agroforestry can be traced to the year 1982, but it picks up around 1988. On the other hand, the association of Leucaena with the word invasive species picks up somewhere near 2007 or 2008. This means that association of Leucaena in Indian context is more with agroforestry and very new with invasive species. Also, at a more local scale, Manipur, for instance, has a consumptive value for the tree. The forest department itself considers it as an edible tree species, and people have cultural associations with it. It has become an ingredient in food culture. In an entirely different stream, market also seems to be playing an important stakeholder. Although the tree was used under the afforestation programs undertaken by the government of India, but its utility is not limited to afforestation per se. It has a wide application in paper and pulp industry. Notice the graph which shows annual increase in plantation of Leucaena in one of the units of JK Paper Limited. To date, this unit has promoted the establishment of approximately 50,000 hectares of forestry plantations in Gujarat and Maharashtra alone. And last but not the least, going back to my study site, park visitors mostly associate this tree with its fragility but also with fodder and fuel wood. Also, most of them consider it as part of nature or as a tree having some value. in all the target organism was evident in 4 out of 5 sites, and the data analysis show that this tree is a significant contributor in tree diversity. At the management aspect, the global legal discourse around invasive species takes a stern stance against these species and streamlines this through institutionalization. The next graphic can be read by reading either of the four arms. These arms are mirror images of each other. For instance, the language in contents of global is same as that of statutory and legislative. Notice the most common words such as prevention and eradication used in either of the arms. This institutionalization of global legal discourse is further reproduced at local scale through local governance institutions. But there are conflicts between these institutional stakeholders as well, as we have clearly seen in the case of Manipur and the national policy of India. All this complicates the management of invasive species. The global legal discourse, at one hand, tries to institutionalize the eradication of invasive species. However, on the other hand, the discourse of agroforestry tries to promote its economic potential. This becomes a tug of war kind of situation between two discourses, leading to a very chaotic management of invasive species where all the stakeholders are not at the same level. Thus, is this categorization of invasive species really relevant in the case of urban areas then? As we have clearly seen that global categorization is itself fluid, and moreover it melds at more local scale as people have their own perceptions about it. The global legal discourse not only promotes negative attributes associated with invasive species, but also ignores the local perspectives. These perspectives are required to be mainstreamed so that a more inclusive strategy can be devised for their management. On the ecological dimension, Tansley suggested that anthropogenic activities may lead to anthropogenic climax. That is, when human beings are kept in the real picture, then their activities may lead to different possibilities of climax or an altogether alternative climax community. This means a very different assemblage of species from the past. On the other hand, urban water bodies are highly contaminated by both industrial and municipal effluents. They have high concentrations of phosphorus, nitrogen, pesticides, hydrocarbons, heavy metals. The basic environment conditions such as soil and hydrology for native biodiversity are heavily altered. Is the existence of equilibrium points or balance of nature really relevant in the context of cities then? Shilthusian writes in Darwin Comes to Town, quote, "It sounds cozy to plant native flora in the city, but we have to face the fact that many of the species that have been evolving and adapting to the environments most successfully are non-native. Cities make the best case to be studied in the light of the idea of novel ecosystems. These ecosystems differ in composition and structure from present and past systems as a result of species distribution dynamics, environmental alteration, and the shifting values about nature and ecosystems. They are better representations of today's Earth. In urban areas, these non-native and invasive species not only provide ecosystem services, but are seen to be providing refuge to both residential and migratory birds. The evidence of co-occurrence of Leucaena with native species, as shown in this research, suggests that a more value-neutral approach is required to understand invasive species in a more holistic way. Thank you.